Contact reports even translation English translation 7th contact Tuesday, 25th February 1975, 6:02 p.m.
You called me yourself today. Evidently you have to tell me something important, Semjase.
So it is, but you must remain silent about this.
Okay, Semjase, I will do as you wish and I will remain silent about it.
So now, I want to tell you something that will surely please you soon. I will receive a new beamship, which you can then also photograph at close range in order to get rather good photos. Unfortunately, in my current ship the automatic beams are still installed, which would destroy your films up to a distance of about 100 meters. That is to say very precisely 90 meters. The radiation is not harmful to living organisms, but as I said, it would destroy your films.
Excellent, I am already looking forward to it. May I then also capture the inner furnishings and so on the film and take the flight with you that you have promised me?
You may fly with me when the time has come for it. However, I must not allow you to take even one single photograph inside the beamship. Perhaps at later times, but that is not for me to decide. At a later time you may then maybe also take a picture of me. But for the time being this is not yet up for discussion. And perhaps it also cannot be, because very specific reasons do not allow this yet or not at all.
It's all right, Semjase, I do not want to pressure you. It is enough for me if you say that is how it is. You also do not need to tell me the reasons, because they must surely be of importance, and therefore perhaps you are not allowed to mention them.
They are of importance, that is right. But you are mistaken in that I may not mention them to you. It's just that you may not pass them on, so you would have to keep them to yourself.
I already understand, and thus you also should not tell me the reasons.
You are very mentally fine-feeling. But now, I would like to ask you not to forget my task.
Certainly not. Also, how could I? But do you already want to go again?
No. I only asked you again because it is very important. I actually have time today, and indeed, a little more than usual.
That makes me happy because that way we can have a chat in a relaxed atmosphere.
I am also happy about it, because it is very well doing for me to talk to a human being like you. You have a characteristic of yourself that is very likable to me, in a very peculiar way. And also your often extreme thought processes and your philosophy attract me.
Do you now just have to make me a marriage proposal, Semjase?
Exactly, we would make a nice couple.
One just has to have ideas, Semjase.
You certainly are not lacking in those, and neither in your peculiar sense of humor.
But unfortunately my humor is often perceived as a serious matter.
You are just far ahead of your time and think in other dimensions.
I have also already considered that, but whether it really is so, I do not know how to assess it.
Do not be so modest, for you know it exactly.
All right, but do we not want to talk about something else?
That's typical of you, but you are right, let's talk about something else. First, I would like to answer the question you asked me last time. Rashid was already one of our contacts since 1956. As you do know, he was a priest of the Greek Orthodox Catholic Church. We engaged him to take several things in hand, which he also promised us to do. Thus, we thought that he would be the right man to solve a very difficult task. Consequently, we showed him the spot where he could have found the Talmud Emmanuel, but which you then found. That original script that Judas Iscariot had written during the lifetime of Emmanuel, alias Jesus Christ. Through our help, he learned the old Aramaic language and was thus able to translate the scripts. He did this very correctly and made a German language translation that is, indeed, known to you. Through the reading of the original scripts, Rashid succumbed to pangs of conscience and suddenly no longer knew what he should acknowledge as truth. To the outside he made the feigned conviction known that he would give belief to the Talmud, but in reality the religion was too deeply enshrined in him, and he suffered from pangs of conscience. This, then, was also the reason why he officially withdrew from his religious belief and devoted himself solemnly to the task of translating the aforementioned script, which he did very correctly in spite of everything. But as I said, he was not convinced and never knew what he should do. In addition, he lived constantly in anxiety that his found scripts might become discovered and known. So as a precaution we had to associate him with someone who did not know anxiety and who guaranteed us according to his character and knowledge that he was able to secure the scripts. So therefore you. Unfortunately, however, Rashid became more and more entangled in his anxiety, and he began to divulge things that could become dangerous to him and the Talmud. He took it so far that by the middle of 1974, he had no choice but to flee from Jerusalem and take off to Lebanon, where he lived in a refugee camp under a false name together with his family. But he then also had to flee again from there and left the country. His anxiety, however, was to blame for the fact that he locked all scripts in a wooden wall, where they were completely destroyed by a fire just a few hours later when Israeli military invaded. Therefore, it was his fault that everything was destroyed. But actually it is also our fault, because we trusted him too much and expected too much of him, whereby the most valuable evidence could be destroyed, which could ever have revealed the untruth of the Christian and all other sects and religions connected with it. But there still exists more than a quarter of the script in its German version, and it will also in this way be sufficient to bring the truth to light and free the human being from a deadly delusion.
So this is how things are. Sure, what is Rashid doing now?
We broke off all contacts with him when he fled with his family from Lebanon and left the script for destruction. We only know that he was most recently in Iraq. From then on, we were no longer interested in him. He and his family have gotten lost somewhere in the world, just as he has also lost his real name.
What is that supposed to mean again? Is his name not Rashid?
No, because only his cousin is called by that name. I do not want to mention his real name officially, because perhaps he is now using it again just as he did as a priest. Despite everything, we are not hostile-minded towards him and do not want to cause him any difficulties. That is why I do not want to mention his name openly.
All right, Semjase, I also do not want to know it.
You are not curious at all, although you know the real name.
Otherwise now and then I am indeed, but when I do not want to be, then I just am not. With your allusion, however, do you mean the real given name or first name that begins with an I?
You are honest. Yes, that name is meant.
Thank you, but were you also honest when during our last conversation you kindly positioned me under the fourth main stage and the fifth substage? I find that somewhat pompous and fantastic for me. If I let that be published, then I will be insulted as being a megalomaniac and a liar.
Do you think, then, that I am lying, as you call this?
Not directly, Semjase, because I would rather like to put it this way, that you are perhaps so kind as to swindle me.
I have no necessity for such kind of things. I am not lying to you, and I am not swindling you. Such things are really far from me. Just let your fellow human beings insult you as a liar or megalomaniac, since it will never hurt you. The most important thing is that you are very much ahead of your time and all human beings, and that you actually have to be included in the above-mentioned stages. This alone is important because it is your advantage. You know very well that you appear to yourself as a stranger in this time and in this world. In this you have the best proof that your placement is correct and that it is no bad or friendly joke. Your spirit and your knowledge as well as your consciousness are very far developed in relation to the spiritual teaching and spiritual concerns, and nothing like them can be found on the earth. Yet this is an unsolved mystery for us.
Should I now low cry, curse, or be grateful?
None of all. You just have to accept the fact, nothing else.
I give up, otherwise I may end up going crazy.
A life form with your spiritual and consciousness-based state can no longer go crazy so easily unless evil external dualplan is used.
Well then, not I really give up on it.
You will not do that, because you yourself know very well that it is actually as I say.
Oh boy, of course I know that, but why do we just always have to talk about the fact that I know such things? I happen to know it, and that should be enough.
Do not get agitated, because I know how difficult you often feel, because you cannot talk to any human being about it. You are therefore also lonely in this world. But you can talk with me about everything because I understand the sense of your words and thoughts. Get used to it, then you will no longer get agitated.
Thanks, I will try it, even though it will be damn difficult.
I think that I will now go again, as I do not want to burden you.
That is nonsense, because for the first time in my life I feel really good. It also seems to me as though we have already known each other for thousands of years. I am really very happy.
Then it is all right. Should we talk, then, about something else, or shall I tell you more about the history of humankind?
That can still wait, because due to our battle of words, I have come across entirely different thoughts.
As you wish, I will not tell you what to do.
If others had even just a small portion of your intellect, then life would often not be so difficult. But let's not do that now, because I really have a question. I deal a lot with parapsychological problems, and there I often come across things that present me with enormous mysteries. But on the other hand, I know some people by name and reputation who hold some kind of doctorate or even professorship of parapsychological degrees. In long-winded speeches they often try to make some parapsychological phenomena plausible to the layman, whereas I often call these explanations acute crazy ideas and even idiocy, because they cannot demand any understanding from me. What should I do about it, because this is often perceived with difficulty by others?
You should not do anything about it, for in most cases, your view is correct, for you also have to perceive idiocy as such. Unfortunately, it is customary with you that so-called academics sit on some doctorate or professorship chairs, who are in truth no academics. A doctor or a professor of parapsychology, as you call this field, should also actually be a parapsychologist. This means that such an academic should have paranormal abilities at his or her disposal. Otherwise he or she cannot be called a parapsychologist and will never be able to bring forward any fundamental cognitions in this area.
What about the so-called spiritual healers?
Countless of them are simple fraudsters and charlatans who only rely on the rock-solid irrational beliefs of their patients and hangers and through which they unconsciously and in a belief-based manner heal themselves. However, there are also many who are actually capable of using their powers of consciousness for the well-being of their fellow human beings.
May I learn names on this?
Sure, but you must keep them to yourself, because at least in this respect we do not want to harm deceivers and failures in order to avoid further evil. In the main, however, it is the greatest deceivers who bear the greatest and most well-known names, while real experts are usually as good as unknown.
Thanks, that's sufficient. Names are also not so important. But what would still interest me is this: have you already heard of Guy, or is he somehow known to you?
We follow a lot of events on the earth, that's why we have also become aware of him. He possesses certain mental powers, but which he himself is not able to control. Each undertaking of him necessitates certain consciousness-based powers of his fellow human beings. This means that he activates the powers of consciousness of many fellow human beings unconsciously, as he is unable to control this, and these human beings then also unconsciously assist him in his undertaking. His own consciousness-based abilities would not be sufficient for an undertaking.
That's about what I have suspected.
Do not be so modest, because I know that you have met the very core of it. You always present yourself as more unknowing than you are in truth. Just why?
So, without his dear fellow human beings, he would be a nobody and would not be able to apply his minimally developed abilities. However, to your question, I do not wish to answer.
Sure, that's how it is. So then, if you do not want to elaborate on my question, then so be it.
I have had a presentiment of that. I mean, with regard to the you.
You have known this.
Okay, I have known it, and I also think that I know that you is a deceiver in this matter, because he claims that he was staying in a UFO. In my view, he first became aware of UFOs in America.
Here, too, you have deducted exactly the right combination, because he has never even come close to a beamship, nor has he ever entered one. However, he already heard about UFOs in Israel, and not only in America, as you assumed. But very many human beings already know that he is a beamship deceiver, and that's why his name is on many people's lips. We can therefore name him here without hesitation.
Isn't that unfair?
No, because he and his manager are willing to publish deceitful contact reports, which can be seen here to be untrue by mentioning his name. It is, in fact, already enough that certain deceivers like George Adams, Kai and K. McCulloch and so on have driven many human beings into delusion and misery.
As you wish. But now I have brought along a whole list of questions that were presented to me and for which I am to ask you for answers.
Are these questions from your circle of friends?
Yes, but these are also questions that often occur to me myself.
Very good, then ask.
The most frequently mentioned question is whether I may also bring along friends of mine and so forth to our meetings.
That cannot happen, unfortunately. The reasons for this are well known to you. If I would allow that, then we could totally officially turn to the whole of humanity. However, I have already talked at length about the fact that we are not yet doing this or will ever do so. Sorry, I only gave you an answer to your question.
The apology is not for me, but for all those for whom I have addressed the question to you.
Of course, I should have known that.
My next question deals with the earthly human races. We have here yellow, red, white, brown, and black human beings. How does that come? Why is there this color differentiation?
This actually belongs in the history of Earth humanity, which I wanted to continue to tell you. But I want to answer the question already now for you, and I can spare myself these remarks later. On Earth there are not only the 5 color races mentioned by you, it's just that the others are completely unknown to you. In part, they live in places where no human being has been able to find them yet, partly.
Do you mean that they might perhaps live underground, as for example the claim goes that this would be the case in Mexico, or that they live under domes in inaccessible mountains or inside of hills, about which also mythological things are told?
Certainly, and here and there these races also step into the world of the sun and mingle with the inhabitants of the surface. Particularly in countries with many different races, they do not attract attention and can move around unencumbered, especially if they veil their faces in the way customary in the country. It gets already more difficult if the color of their face is very noticeable. So for example, bluish, who
Live in the Indian area, yes.
You know this?
I have eyes in my head.
Of course, but you have overrun me once again. But further, I wanted to say that some differently colored races already became extinct a long time ago. But in the same way they are all the product of the celestial suns, that is to say they were begotten of them, just like the Earth race is still existing today. The celestial suns are starfarers, as we want to call our forebears, were at home on many different planets of stars in a different space-time configuration or far away from the Sol system, whereby the planets were fundamentally different in climatic terms. Hence they also produced other races which were able to adapt to the climate from the beginning. Due to the climate conditions, also a corresponding skin color developed, of which there are innumerable in the universe. Their body sizes were also different because, depending on the gravity of the planet in question, they ranged from only 50 centimeters tall up to several meters. There were and are even beings, which you call gigantic ones, gents or titans, and such beings too once endued the earth with life. They too produced offspring here, but they were gradually exterminated because they were usually very malicious and exercised tyranny. The different color races of today are, thus, descendants of our variously colored forebears, who came from different planets of foreign stars.
So then today's human beings on the earth were not actually created on the earth alone, and they neither are descended from the apes.
Do you actually believe in this ape-human being theory?
I am not stupid after all. My intellect tells me something different than the crazy brain of a Darwin, who has brought this horror tale to the world and fraudulently underpinned it with falsified bones of apes, which to this day has been concealed and kept secret by the responsible persons.
I did not regard you as stupid.
I did not mean it that way. It is just a saying to explain what I am perceiving.
Oh, I see. Well, you are right with your view that the human beings of the earth are not descendants of the apes. They were partially begotten by our forebears, who also mixed themselves with earth beings, who were simply called apes at that time. A designation that means nothing other than
the bearing woman or the one giving birth.
Sure, but once again, you beat me to it. How do you know that?
I also have my head for the thinking and for the deducting, but on the other hand I also know the Talmud manual, somewhat more than just that which still exists in the German language.
Of course, but the earth beings at that time were of the most diverse forms and kinds. Some of them were completely wild creatures of human-like forms, some of which had been marooned on the earth in earlier millennia by our forebears, that is, their descendants. These descendants of the marooned were abused by foreign spacefarers, and this fertilized also by genetic manipulation different animal species and produced new life forms by genetic engineering. One of these, by the way, is the ape being still known today, which represents a human-animal mutation, namely the Panpaniscus bonobo equals pygmy chimpanzee. Thus, the ape being is descended from the human being, not vice versa. Other ape beings resulted from natural evolution in the hominid line. Your researchers and scientists have already found many in-between mutations between humans and ape beings, but usually only as skeletons or partial skeletons. These in-between mutations, part human, part ape being, are known to the human beings under names such as Africanus, Peking man, and Neanderthal, and so on. 4 different species of them have survived over all past millennia, and their descendants still live today, although no longer in large hordes, but only isolated or in very small groups. They are so wild and shy that human beings will hardly ever see them. The human beings have coined special names for them, Yeti and so forth. The apes were, besides earth-created hominid living creatures, nothing more than very wild descendants of those marooned thousands of years ago, from whom at that time any tools were taken away. They were like wild animals that lived in large hordes. When our forebears finally settled on the earth, they broke a strict law and inflicted dualton on these beings. This means that they cast their spell on the female beings, who despite their wildness were somehow beautiful, and mated with them. From this the first higher developed forebears of today's human beings emerged. They were called Adam in the old language of the forebears, which means human being of earth. For the first of them, this designation then remained as his name, and you still use it today. But since our forebears were mixed races of different colors and sizes, they of course also produced different colors and races of different sizes completely according to their characteristics. The smallest ones were 50 centimeters tall, while the largest and most vicious ones reached some 12 meters. Their appearance was also varying, and some type of them were only remotely reminiscent to human forms. They were left to die out or were killed if they were too vicious. In many cases, they hid themselves in far remote areas and survived for thousands of years, as their average age was about 1,500 years. But little by little, they also became victims of the time or of the human beings. The last of the vicious ones, whose life was ended with Jewel Samkit, died a little more than 230 years ago. Today, according to our knowledge, only 7 such beings of the old human life forms still live on the earth, where they remain so well hidden that they will certainly never be found and will one day die a peaceful death, and that without descendants, because they have become too old and passive for propagation. More common than these gigantic ones, Titanic, and Cyclops, as you call them, were the simple gents. They often served great and power-greedy rulers. They were called Goliaths and were especially used for purposes of war.
Thank you, that was very detailed, Semjase. But now I still have a question about the future. Can you tell me a few things about the future which lie ahead for the human beings and the earth?
Now you are really putting me in a quandary. For many things it is good to know them in advance. For many things, however, it is advisable not to know them, if one does not know for certain that one can face that knowledge properly. I may well entrust to you what the future will bring for you human beings, but for the other human beings that is without doubt a dangerous imposition.
I actually do not want to know every detail but just individual things from a general point of view.
Nevertheless, I have to think about this first and also consult with the others.
Of course, Semjase, I do not want to tempt you into something that would not be right for you.
That would not be so easy, but still, I thank you. We have found exactly the right human being in you, and I am very happy about that. You belong to a group of human beings who concern themselves with prescience and spiritual science. I have often endeavored around the interests of this group and have found that it's the only one in this form. You work on a very real basis and unconstrained. I have determined that other groups of the same kind unfortunately deal with things that have fallen to the unreal. They often carry out experiments that they themselves can't understand and for which they usually search for false explanations. But this is not all that surprising, because in these groups practically only human beings are admitted who have fallen prey to a deluded belief and the irrational teachings of the religion. I congratulate your group, which is so unconstrained and real in its approach to every subject. Not in mystical form as others do. You are on the right track and keep it that way.
Thanks, Semjase. May I still ask you another question, or was that your farewell speech for today?
You amuse me with your peculiar sense of humor. Just keep asking, as I still have some time.
A moment ago you just mentioned our group. That's exactly where my next question comes from, the same as some others before. How are things regarding the world of spirits and the so-called electronic voice phenomena? Are you able to give me exhaustive information in this respect?
Not in the way you would like, nevertheless. I can explain to you some details which you may pass on. There are unfortunately many things that a human being may only come to know after he or she has become spiritually thinking and the spiritual knowledge and spiritual essence of wisdom have developed into the must-have form. Therefore, I have to conceal many things unfortunately also from you. A world of spirits, as you called it, does not exist. There are only the fine fluidal worlds in this regard. These are worlds that are located in other dimensions and harbor bodiless spirit forms. When a spirit leaves a material body, then it cannot simply settle down anywhere. It must inhabit a body again, that is to say it enters a fine fluidal world, thus a world of spirit forms, of which there are countless ones. There, the spirit lives as its own form for so long, until it returns again into a newly created host body.
That means that the spirit will as a human being not always have the same material body and not the same personality, if I understand it correctly, because you just said a newly created body.
Right, this means that every spirit form normally has a residence body that is specially tailored to it, in which it lives through its life in material form. Over an entire main period, one can thus observe that the facial features of the host body are not always alike and that they therefore change very noticeably. This applies until a high spiritual level is reached. Not with very low, but with very high spiritual levels, the faces of all host bodies of the various spirit beings begin to resemble each other. So when a guest body has died, then the spirit leaves it and normally enters a fine fluidal world. There too it has to live through certain periods again, before it can call upon a host body anyway. But if a host body is due to some circumstances destroyed with Semjase and prematurely, before it is brought to life by the spirit on the 21st day, then it can happen that the spirit in question does not as soon as possible look for another host body and inhabits it, but that it remains in the realm of the other world. So it will not then penetrate into bodies that are already occupied. Therefore, this won't have as a consequence that two spirits live in a single host body and cause serious confusion. There are thus no possibilities for that. So the normal process is that the spirit re-enters the fine fluidal world and in turn while learning spends another period there.
This is roughly in line with my imaginations, although not that precisely. But how about that? Are we able to enter any kind of connection with this overall consciousness block belonging to the spiritual being in a finer fluidal world?
Sure, but that is not recommendable. The overall consciousness blocks, which enter fine fluidal worlds like the spirit forms themselves, are no further along in their knowledge than they were in their material life. Untruth and lies and very deliberate deception are still characteristic of them as well. Therefore the materially living ones should not want to get in touch with them, because they could be lied to on a large scale. It would be better for the living ones to increase their knowledge through their own consciousness work than to aim to acquire it in this way, because in many cases they would only be led into the unreal. Of course, there are also overall consciousness blocks that would be able to respond in an honest mentality. However, there are few of them, and they live in higher spheres because they are further developed consciousness-wise. On the whole, however, there are few human beings who can enter into connection with the deceased, as you say. Although you have large spiritualistic circles on the earth, these are often nothing more than deception. Many mediums are only quite good actors and indulge the desires of their acting drives. A fact that, unfortunately, can only be proven by earth humans with great difficulty. But on the other hand, there are also those mediums who imagine tremendous things and then imitate these in a trance state in all perfection, whereby a deception takes place again. In this process their power of imagination often extends so far that they can tell factual things of other human beings from the past or the future and can even imitate their voices in all perfection. But also not to be forgotten are those mediums who are exploited by some beings of other dimensions just for fun or maliciously. There are actually only very few real mediums, and they are mostly almost unheard of. But those who are real mediums are silent about it and do not make a fuss about it.
So then I haven't been mistaken? But now what about the electronic voice phenomena?
Here many points play into each other. Most cases of electronic voice phenomena can be traced back most definitely to the radio you are familiar with, whereby so-called amateur radio enthusiasts often allow themselves their jokes. But on the other hand, many of these contacts occur by means of communication of space travelers. However, the thoughts of human beings also play an important role and often impose themselves as audible voices, and namely not only on tapes but openly audibly. Often such a questioner of tape voices unconsciously imitates a voice that somehow appeals to him in his thoughts, and in so doing transmits exactly the answer to the tape that one wants to have or hear.
But how is that possible?
If I had to explain that to you, it would be extremely complicated and lengthy. I can tell you, however, that every receiver is also a transmitter and can catch highest swinging waves of thought and pass them on to a receiver.
So then electronic tape voices would not at all be phenomena of another dimension or world of spirits.
That isn't entirely correct, because just as there are genuine mediums who are able to enter into connection with other dimensions, there are also genuine electronic tape voice phenomena that really come from overall consciousness blocks of various fine fluidal worlds. However, there are just as few of these as genuine mediums. Unfortunately, there is a lot of deception and charlatanry in this area as well, which is attributable to the desire to show off and so forth of the human beings. The electronic voice phenomena known on Earth are, as a rule, only based on retrievals from the storage banks, Akashic records, and are valueless and meaningless, while the genuine recordings are kept secret.
Thank you, Semjase. You have really helped me an awful lot.
For today it must also be enough, because the duty calls me again. Unfortunately, I still have to tell you that I cannot come here for the next 24 days because I have a long journey to. Please don't mention the place, since a certain task is incumbent on me, which has been assigned to me.
What a pity, Semjase. But with that the case, may I still ask you one or two questions, since I won't see you for so long?
Sure, just ask. There's still enough time for that.
Thanks. So far, you have never told me where you actually always stay when you are not carrying on conversations with me. Are you allowed to give me information about this?
In part, I can elucidate this to you. That is to say, I may tell you everything, but you must not make everything known to others. We have our bases on the Earth, as well as on many other planets, where we stay continuously. We also have such a base in this country, Switzerland. It is located high up in the mountains. Near there I have my main whereabouts when I am on the Earth. However, we also have some other important stations that are distributed all over the world. But they are all built so securely that it would be impossible to find them if one does not know them exactly. Moreover, I am very often on the move and have to fulfill my tasks on a wide variety of worlds. I also often go to visit my home, as you tend to say, and so I also often spend time on the playas, as we call them, for the time being.
Can we have a more detailed talk about this at a later occasion?
Of course, except many things will be meant for your ears only.
Nevertheless, I am curious. The time till then will be a bit long to me, though.
I will remain in thought connection with you.
That's at least a consolation, but can you still explain to me what the so-called spirit music is all about?
Spirit music? What's that?
It is, after all, always claimed that certain people would receive pieces of music transmitted from the other world.
Oh, I see. You call that spirit music?
That's what certain people call it. But what's it all about?
It is an evil deception, self-deception, or self-suggestive delusion and the like. Spirit beings do not transmit music to the living ones.
Okay, and what's up with the so-called display of power, the magic?
Regarding this, you are best oriented, and you know exactly that it does not exist in the form that is generally assumed and advocated. Magic is based on consciousness-based plus and minus powers.
Thus good and evil, or in other words, positive and negative.
I have already said that you are most accurately oriented and knowing about it.
Nevertheless, I would like to talk with you about it.
Sure, but we must postpone that to a later date, because now, I really have to go.
Of course, Semjase. I do not want to bring you into a quandary. Task Part 1 from Contact on 25th February 1975, 6:02 p.m.
You are not allowed to tell anyone the first part of this task. Therefore, also do not write it down, so in this way, it also cannot become accessible to outsiders by any chance. This part of the task is subject to the seal of secrecy.
Task Part 2 from contact on 25th February 1975, 6:02 p.m.
Tomorrow I will receive my new beamship, which I had already announced to you previously. As a result, we will have 4 beamships stationed in your country for 3 days. We have decided to show you these 4 ships for one time, so you shall in 2 days at 10 o'clock go to where we will then show you a demonstration flight that you can photograph. I will not contact you, but however I will land my new ship so you can take very close-up recordings. Unfortunately, I will not have much time because I still have several things to do for the task I have to carry out. Hence there is not enough time for a contact. However, to make myself a little more familiar with my new ship, I will undertake another flight in the afternoon, and I leave it up to you as to where I can meet you again for a flight contact, where you then shall take pictures again.
It would be very convenient for me in at 4:00 p.m. because I will be there in the area then. If that's all right with you.
Sure, I will be there at that time, at 4:00 p.m. on the 27th February. Regarding my old ship, I would still like to explain that it is already several hundred years old and still represents one of the old forms. These old ships are still built according to the principle of corrugation, a form that has found application with us for reasons of stability. But now, these types are all going to be eliminated. For this purpose, mine will also be brought home on 3rd Mark by one of our pilots and in company of a second smaller ship of the Reconnaissance class. If you now want, I can arrange that you can photograph them as well before they go on their journey.
Of course, gladly, Semjase. Could they possibly come to it?
Sure, but be there punctually at 5:00 p.m.
Thanks, I will quite certainly remember the time.
Good, this will be the second part of your task, by which you shall create good photo material.
Task Part 3 from contact on 25th February 1975, 6:02 p.m. Additional explanation during the thought contact on 25th February 1975.
As the third part of the task, I would like to ask you to pass the following on to relevant authorities, but bearing in mind that for the time being these cognizances are with their full implications not intended for the broad spectrum of the public. You know the path to take. It leads via Mr. Carl Vade, whom you had supplied with your contact reports. He is and remains the determinative person who shall purposively spread and transmit the news. However, in the last few days I had to realize that Mr. Vade was very shaken after receiving the reports and was befallen by doubt. Unfortunately, he is also bound by things that are religious. This is due to the fault of certain alleged contact persons, who were able to influence him cheatingly. Even his closest relatives and countless friends have thereby been affected. Nevertheless, Mr. Vade will have to triumph over himself and acknowledge the truth. His rationality will have to triumph, for his sense asks for it. It is at your discretion whether you want to tell Mr. Vade my comments in this regard, which would however be appropriate. He is known to us as an honest thinking and honest acting human being, and he appreciates honest openness. Therefore, as the most rational one of all in terms of spreading the truth, I have also mentioned his name to you, even though, for reasons known to you, we cannot enter into personal contact with him. But you should stand between him and us as intermediary in the sense that you convey our messages to him and he takes their appropriate spreading to hand, because they are very important and of great significance. Today's message is not intended for the broader public, but only for all those who are honestly conscious of our existence. Besides, first of all, however, for your governments and scientists, create a group from your circles that will specifically only be dedicated to tasks of the kind as the following one will be. For this one and further ones are of immense significance for the continued existence of all life forms of the earth. The group shall have its field of activity in keeping scientists and governments from putting into practice certain things, research results, cognitions and achievements that can bring death, depravity and annihilation upon all life forms in the entire solar system. Today's message is this: for many decades we have been examining all spheres of your world, its steady increase of its changes and the dangerous effects of propellants and other dangerous pollutants released by the human being of Earth. For some years now, we have noticed that in the stratosphere, a steadily increasing dangerous change becomes noticeable, which can have fatal consequences for all earthly life to an increasing extent. The ozone belt of the stratosphere is changing due to irresponsible influences of human achievements. Various ozone-depleting chemicals rise as gas substances into the stratosphere and damage the ozone belt. In particular, it concerns chlorofluorocarbons and bromine gases, which smell very bad and, in contrast to the term of the human beings of Earth, are designated with us and in our language as poison gases and not as chlorofluorocarbons. It is dangerous that these poison gases reach into the ozone layer of Earth and slowly decompose it. Chlorofluorocarbon gases are called bromos among the Pleiades. It is already damaged and destroyed at an average extent of 6.38%. A percentage that is already starting to be harmful and dangerous to all life forms and that is able to cause mutative changes. This is a percentage that has been reached in as little as 60 years. In particular, it is the chlorofluorocarbon gases and the bromine gas substances that, along with many other pollutants, are slowly destroying the ozone belt, as I have already mentioned earlier. As a result, more ultraviolet radiation from the sun is able to penetrate into the atmosphere, which can damage all life forms. Above different areas, this ozone belt has already been dangerously impaired and has become varying in its protection. At 3 different points there is already the danger that it will be broken through within a few decades and completely annihilated if the release of destructive factors is not restricted. Failure to do so would mean that holes would be torn in the protective shield and ultraviolet solar radiation would penetrate unhindered, which would entail an agonizing death of all life forms. Anything that accidentally gets into the area of the dangerous radiation penetrating through the hole is ultimately exposed to salvageless annihilation. Destructive chemical substances, gases and radiations are also mainly released by explosive motors and further material-destroying processes of other kinds, such as for example nuclear fission and forms similar to it, which have subjected the entire course of the world and all life forms to a bad change on a large scale since 1945. However, destructive chemical gases and so forth are also released by things of everyday life, as each spray can also releases other chemicals besides chlorofluorocarbons, which rise up to the stratosphere and slowly but systematically destroy it. Recently, researchers and scientists of various countries have become that much more knowledgeable and advanced in their cognitions that they have recognized the destructive effect on the ozone belt caused by various chemicals and in particular chlorofluorocarbons and now want to assess this in their irresponsible delusion for power for purposes of war technology. They have already developed fundamental ideas for building missile bodies, whose destructive and deadly factors are supposed to be chlorofluorocarbons and also bromine substances. If they were shot up into the stratosphere and caused to explode there, the consequence would be that enormous holes would be torn into the ozone belt and all ultraviolet radiation from the sun would penetrate uninhibitably. Such a hole, however, can only close itself again very slowly, whereby the process may take centuries, provided that no further destructive substances penetrate. In addition, the factor that the ozone belt is subject to a certain movement and rooms comes into effect. Hence, a hole in it would not only destroy a very specific area, but it would roam almost uncontrollably and also destroy other wide areas. A fact that is not yet known to your scientists. Moreover, all these are also facts that have hitherto been concealed from the general public. My message is in the sense that the group that you are to form is to dedicate itself to tasks that serve the prevention of and counteract the abuse of such achievements of insanity. Therefore, reach out to governments and scientists and draw their attention to their wrong deeds and actions. It is in the interest of the entire humankind and of all life on Earth to have a banning treaty between all countries of your world in order to stop this deadly insanity. Therefore, turn also to Mikhail Msory at Harvard University in the United States, as he is already an authoritative researcher in this field.
Hingwell, 26 February 1975. Free Community of Interests for Parascience and Spiritual Science and Ufological Studies Weheldenstrasse 10 Hingwell/ZH Switzerland. To all persons responsible in governments, universities, military, science, media, radio and TV institutions and so on of the earth in all countries. Billy Edward Albert Meyer. Happy.
All persons responsible in all governments, universities, military forces, science, media, radio and TV institutions and so on of the earth and all countries are called upon to consider and take note of the following and to take logical measures of related form in order to avert the looming evil for the entire earthly life and for the nature and the planet, as man of contact with extraterrestrial intelligences from the star cluster of the Pleiades in the constellation of Taurus. I have been informed that the earth and all earthly life are threatened by a catastrophe as a result of a progressing destruction of the ozone layer that inhibits the ultraviolet radiation caused by the fault of the human beings of Earth themselves, who damage and destroy the ozone layer in a rapid rate by the production and release of chlorofluorocarbons. According to the information provided by my Pleiadian friends, a worldwide ban on the use of chlorofluorocarbons is urgently needed, and that within shortest time. There must be no time lost, so an absolute ban and an enforcement of the same must take place within the next 12 months if serious damages are to be avoided. According to the information provided to me, the ozone layer is already damaged to such an extent that health-damaging consequences will ensue for fauna and flora and for human life. A fact which will have even much worse impacts if the use of chlorofluorocarbons is not permanently banned due to human irrationality and greed and so on. The southern ozone layer above the polar region is already severely damaged, which is also the case worldwide regarding the entire ozone protective layer of the Earth, albeit only to a very minimal extent for the time being. However, this will change very quickly if the destructive chlorofluorocarbons continue to be used and released. If this continues to happen, then according to the information of the Pleiadians, it will result that by the year 1990, that is to say in only 15 years, the ozone layer will be destroyed and its protective function impaired to such an extent that gigantic holes will form in the ozone layers above the polar regions and then further over the entire Earth, whereby all life will be endangered in its existence. For the human beings, skin cancer will increase in alarming proportions, as will blindness and eye diseases, and so on. However, also the entire fauna and flora will be affected in their existence, from which the dying off and extinction of many plants and trees will be only one of the many evils. In addition, allergies will become more frequent as well as many diseases, along with new evils, for which no healing medicine will stand in the way. All those responsible on the earth are urged to take this warning and this call seriously, to listen to the well-intentioned and knowing words of the Pleiadians and, according to the warning and the call, to do everything necessary to avert the danger of the destruction of the world-encompassing protective ozone layer as long as there is still time to do so, in the interest of all life on the earth. All you responsible persons of the earth, you who have the ability to keep the human beings away from the dangerous use of chlorofluorocarbons by a strict chlorofluorocarbon use ban or by public warnings and so on, or to draw attention to the imminent danger, do everything humanly possible and use all initiative at your disposal to avert the imminent danger and to preserve all life of the earth and the planet itself. Billy Edward Albert Meyer.